It's time now for Mark Meets, in which I speak to the biggest names in the world of politics, sport, showbiz and beyond. Tonight, former Mayor of London from 2000 to 2008, Ken Livingstone, the first inaugural London mayor, no less. He's the man who earned the nickname Red Ken. He served as the Member of Parliament for Brent East from 1987 to 2001, and he was the leader of the Greater London Council, the GLC, from 1981 until its abolition in 86. Characterised by the Telegraph columnist Charles Moore as the only truly successful left-wing British politician of modern times, always principled and never boring, Ken Livingstone is one of the most recognised and significant political figures of his generation. And I'm delighted to say he joins me now. Hi, Ken.
Hi there.
Now, Ken, you let something slip before you came on air, that you were offered a knighthood by Tony Blair.
Yeah, I mean...
Or was it talked about?
I got a phone call saying the Blair government would like to give you a knighthood. And I thought, I don't want people having to say Sir Ken. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's no wrong nonsense.
Well, it would have got you a better restaurant table, wouldn't it?
No, I have always had good restaurant tables. I used to be a restaurant critic back in the 90s. And it was amazing. I mean, it was the Evening Standard employed me, so I could go and have a really expensive meal, but the Evening Standard paid for it. I loved it.
What's the best job you've had in politics?
Oh, I mean, clearly being mayor. Because when I was leader of the GLC, I was running a council. There were 92 members. You had to have votes all the time and everything. But then when Tony Blair created the mayoralty, he just put all the power in the hands of the mayor. And the London Assembly, they could criticise me, but they could never actually block anything I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that was great fun for me. But one day, you'll have a mayor who's corrupt, and that'll be a disaster.
Well, that is obviously a big concern.
Because you actually look at America, they've got the mayoral system, and that's, Tony Blair used the American mayoral system for London. But at any one time in America, there's always at least 50 former mayors, in prison for corruption. And if you put all that power... I mean, I could have sat there in those 8 years and done all these squalid deals with big business, and I could have millions in some Swiss bank account.
Yeah, so the due diligence isn't there, the checks and balances.
Well, very little, because literally the Assembly has virtually no power. Yeah. I mean, whereas when I was the leader of the GLC, the council could remove me from office at any time they wanted.
Whilst you were Mayor of London, you introduced the Congestion Charge, the Oyster card, articulated buses, and you opposed the government's privatisation of London Underground. So which of those would be your great legacy, do you think?
Well, I think the legacy is the Congestion Charge, because a few other cities have now copied that. But mayors are very worried, because when you start charging drivers coming into your city, that might lose you quite a lot of votes. But immediately we did that. Air pollution went down 12%, and we have thousands of people dying every year in London because of the air quality, and we've got to tackle that. And that means encouraging people to leave the car at home and get the bus in or get a bike, and that's important.
You were an independent mayoral candidate, then you were Labour's official selection. So tell me about your relationship with the Blair government whilst you were actually in...
Well, you see, if you think back, the day I became the leader of the Great London Council in 81, Thatcher made a speech saying, my plan was to impose on Britain a communist tyranny like Eastern Europe. Until Thatcher made a speech, no GLC leader ever had a press office. No one knew who you were. And I think Tony Blair grew up in that world. And I think he genuinely believed I was a mad Marxist. My loyalty was communism. I wanted to impose a Trotskyite tyranny and all of that. And so it was only once I became mayor and he saw I was actually... I came into politics to do things, to make life better. And when I got into politics in the late 60s, that was the same for the Tories. I followed John Major onto Lambeth Council. He built more council homes than the previous Labour administration. In those days, everyone came into politics to make life better for people. Now, it's filled with idiots like Boris that want to be an international bloody celebrity.
How did you rate Boris as London mayor? Because he would argue crime fell and the economy boomed.
No, I mean, he did absolutely nothing except he built the cable car to nowhere. And still today, that has only 4 regular daily users. I mean, I looked at that when I was mayor, and we just saw it's going to be a disaster. I can't understand why he actually did it. And that is the only thing he did. He ended up opening a lot of things I'd started, but he never bloody well invited me to that.
Well, of course, the bicycle rental scheme is known as the Boris Bike scheme.
Yeah,
but I believe you conceived it, is that right?
Yeah, we started that. But, you know, Boris is just a bit like Donald Trump, always just presenting himself and wanting to be a celebrity and all that nonsense. Whereas I just came into politics because I like to run things and do things. I mean, when I left school, my first work was 8 years in a cancer unit attached to the NHS. And that defined my thinking. You came in to make life better for people.
I mean, Boris Johnson has got a few things done, hasn't he? He was successfully the mayoral candidate twice for the Conservatives in a Labour-dominated city. He got Brexit done. He had the amazing landslide victory in December 2019. And he also presided over a world-class vaccine rollout during the pandemic. He's no slouch.
Well, actually, the vaccine rollout, that's down to the doctors and surgeons in the NHS, not Boris.
Well, no, because it was the Department of Health and also the vaccine officials who hedged their bets brilliantly and invested in all of those technologies.
Look, I watched Boris Johnson those 8 years he was mayor. I was amazed that he never really initiated anything. And I realised...
Except an economic boom?
Well, no.
What about the construction boom in London?
Well, let me tell you, after he defeated me and became mayor, he said, I'd like to take you out for a meal. And I assumed he wanted to talk to me about how to run the mayoralty. All he talked about, that entire meal, was how I had failed to become Prime Minister. And I realised then that's all he wants to do. And he did virtually nothing. And even now as Prime Minister, he's doing much less than almost any other Prime Minister in my lifetime. He is the worst Prime Minister of my lifetime.
I mean, this is a Prime Minister who challenged the SAGE scientists in July, the 19th of July. He insisted on Freedom Day, cases fell, and the scientists were proved wrong. SAGE wanted him to cancel Christmas. He pushed back on that. This guy's got good instincts.
No.
And now he's played a blinder in Ukraine, with the Ukrainian people saying that he's been very supportive, a standing ovation from Zelensky, and Russia saying their greatest threat is the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, which is flattery.
And that is about the only thing I agree with him on. I'm appalled that the West hasn't done more to stop Putin and drive him out. But the simple fact is, I just watched Boris, and he just never seemed to have an agenda. It was always just about promoting himself. He wants to be a famous international celebrity. I mean, and literally, for 7 years, he was a journalist working at the Telegraph under the editor Max Hastings. And I bumped into Max Hastings and he said to me, never leave Boris alone with your wife or your wallet.
Right, yeah. Wise advice. Let me ask you about your politics. Were you always politically to the left, Ken?
No. I mean, my mum and dad were working class Conservatives. The whole nature.
What went wrong?
Well, no, a third of...
Black sheep in the family.
In that post-war world, a third of the working class voted Conservative. And it was only, I suppose, in the 1960s, because my first interest was natural history and astronomy and all that, but then watching the Vietnam War, America just killing millions and millions of Vietnamese, bombing them and all that, I then got interested in politics, and then I decided, I'd come into it and try and make life better for things. So I joined in 1969, just as loads of about a third of Labour Party members were leaving because they're annoyed with the Wilson government. And so 2 years later, I'm on the local council. I couldn't believe it.
Tell me about your relationship with Margaret Thatcher. She was Prime Minister whilst you were serving as leader of the GLC. She presided over its abolition.
Yeah.
So did you encounter her face-to-face very often?
No, it was only when she'd retired as Prime Minister. We were at some social event and she staggered over and said, you must run for mayor. And I thought, but you abolished the GLC, so I was running for it. Now you want me to run for mayor? But she was a bit, frail then. I thought she perhaps wasn't mentally with it.
Perhaps not. No, that's one hell of an endorsement, isn't it? What was your relationship like with the Conservative government in the 80s? It must have been attritional at best.
Well, no, literally, it was just from the moment I became the leader of the GLC, they depicted me as an agent of the Soviet Union. I was supporting the IRA's bombing campaign. I was physically attacked 3 times on the streets in the months after all this propaganda. It was only when I started appearing on TV programmes like this, people realised this was all bollocks. I'm not a mad Marxist.
No, most certainly not. And what about any other ambitions? Did you want to be the leader of the Labour Party at any point?
Oh, I would have loved to have done that. I would have loved to have been Prime Minister. I would have wanted to change our country and make it better.
Why didn't it happen?
Well, basically, all that, loony left smears from Thatcher meant a lot of Labour MPs were very suspicious of me. And when I became an MP, Neil Kinnock, who was the Labour leader, he changed the rules. Up until then, you could stand for the leadership of the Labour Party if 2 Labour MPs nominated you. He made it 20%. No lefty could get 20%. And so it was only when Ed Miliband reduced it to about 12 or 15%, Jeremy Corbyn could just about make it. What's
your overview of Tony Blair's years in power?
He did some good things. I like particularly on lesbian and gay rights and so on. But, of course, the real nightmare, he went along with all the American wars in the Middle East. And that's been all my life. Virtually every Prime Minister, whether Labour or Tory, has gone along with the wars of the United States. Luckily for me, the one that didn't do that, Harold Wilson, in the 1960s, refused to send British troops to Vietnam. Otherwise, my generation, we'd have been all sent off there murdered.
Did the Labour movement pick the wrong Miliband brother when they voted for Ed Miliband?
Well, no, I think Ed Miliband was better than his brother. But at that stage...
David was more electable, wasn't he? More of a Blairite figure.
No. I mean, I wasn't supporting either of them. I was supporting Ed Balls, because Ed Balls had been effectively the deputy to Gordon Brown in the Treasury. I worked with him a lot while I was mayor. He was so good at delivering things. He was the most competent government minister I ever dealt with. He delivered things, they worked.
However, he failed to be elected, which obviously meant that David Cameron got in.
Yeah.
There was a referendum which, in the end, took us out of the European Union. So, you could sort of look back at that decision by the Labour Party to elect Ed Miliband as the beginning of what a lot of people consider to be our problems.
I think if Ed Balls had been the Labour leader, we would have won that election, because he's like me, came into politics to do things, not just be a celebrity.
You mean Ed Miliband?
No, Ed Balls.
Oh, I see. You think Ed Balls should have been leader?
Ed Balls, as I said, in all the time of that Labour government, he was the most effective and competent.
I got my Eds mixed up. I should have...
Get him in and talk to him. You'll love it.
Yeah, no, we'd like to speak to Ed Balls, an interesting guy. What about since then? We've had Jeremy Corbyn leading the Labour Party. That's been a disaster, hasn't it?
Well, part of the problem was Jeremy got elected to Parliament in '83. He spent a third of a century just sitting on the back bench, never running anything. And, although everyone likes him, he had no idea how to actually run it, I was lucky. I joined the Labour Party 2 years later. I'm the Vice Chair of the Local Housing Committee. So all my early time, I learned how to do things. Poor old Jeremy just sat there making speeches on the back benches.
Yeah, and what were his failings as leader of the Labour Party, do you think? Where did he go wrong?
Well, I don't think he really imposed his will on the party.
Well, he got rid of all the Blairite MPs, didn't he?
No, not all of them. But, literally, the first time my partner and I she met him at a dinner, and as we came away, she said, "That's the nicest man I've ever met in my life." And that's how he got the Labour nomination. There's an awful lot of MPs who were not in any sense left-wing, but they voted for Jeremy because he's an incredibly nice guy.
What about the toxic regime around him, though? His advisors, notoriously cruel.
Well, hang on. I don't think they're toxic. Think of all the things that have been said about me and my advisors. We were all depicted as mad commie agents.
And what about the current leader, the current incumbent? How do you rate Keir Starmer?
I really like Keir Starmer, and I think if he can win the next election, he will be an incredibly competent Prime Minister. Because he didn't come into politics to be a celebrity. He came, he's only been in Parliament about 6 years. Before that, his entire career was pursuing and getting prison sentences for murderers and rapists. He's there to do things.
However, what have you seen in him as leader of the opposition that tells you he'll be a great Prime Minister, notwithstanding his legal career? What has he done in politics?
He's there to actually just deliver on policy.
But he's boring everyone to tears, isn't he? Prime Minister's questions, he's got no charisma.
No, I watch and I really admire him. I think he's
Boris
brilliant.
runs rings around him every Wednesday, doesn't he?
Yeah, but that's a joke.
Captain Hindsight.
A Prime Minister that just spends all his time not answering questions and putting off stunts and jokes. Whereas Keir Starmer, like my generation, came into politics to make life better for people.
But he's a bit right on. He's a bit woke, isn't he?
He's a bit
taking the knee, a bit right on.
No.
Taking the knee and just being very virtue signalling all the time.
I watch Prime Minister's questions every week. I think Keir Starmer does brilliantly. But, of course, we now live in a world with so many people that they just want to see funny celebrity things.
What do you think will happen at the next election?
I think Labour can win, and I think it will
On their own?
Oh, yeah. And I think it would be the best Labour government since 1945, Clement Attlee.
Yeah, do you think so?
Yeah.
And when do you think the election will be, by the way?
I have no idea. I mean, you've got all these new rules, so it might be we have to wait another 2 years under this awful idiot.
Final thought. Would you call yourself a socialist?
Oh, yeah.
Do you not think that socialism is done now, given that we've spent £500 billion responding to this pandemic? The coffers are empty. What does a future Labour Prime Minister actually do without the ammunition, without the cash?
If I look back at my lifetime, when you had progressive governments, sometimes Conservative ones, increasing public spending, our lives got better all the time. If you cut public spending, you are damaging people's lives and in some cases actually leading to deaths.
Well, I would agree with you, but that was before we borrowed £500 billion. What do we do now?
Look, we are the 6th richest nation in the world. The simple fact is we're wasting too much of our money on military spending. Germany spends about 2% of their GDP on the military. We spend 3%. I'd reduce it.
Is now the time for that conversation?
Yeah, we're not going to war.
Putin raging across Ukraine?
Putin
an expansionist China? A dangerous North Korea?
No, we're not going to be involved in a war with China, nor even with Putin. I think Putin's a monster, and I look forward to him being removed by his own party at some point.
Yeah. A quick line on this. You were suspended from the Labour Party in April 2016. You were accused of bringing the party into disrepute following a BBC Radio London interview. Do you mind if I quote this to you? You said the following: when Hitler won his election in 1932, his policy then was that Jews should be moved to Israel. He was supporting Zionism before he went mad and ended up killing 6 million Jews. Are you anti-Semitic?
No, that's just simple history. I mean, literally, when Hitler got elected, he sat down, his team did, and signed an agreement with the German Zionists, and over the next 6 years, they worked together to move 60,000 of Germany's Jews to the then British colony of Palestine. If they hadn't done that deal, those 60,000 Jews would have followed the other 6 million to the gas chambers.
But you must regret those comments, given the fact that it makes you sound like an apologist for one of the worst monsters in history. And also, a cursory glance at Mein Kampf will tell you that he had a problem with the Jews from a young age.
Let me tell you what happened. In the week following my suspension, somewhere between 35 and 40 people stopped me on the street. They all said the same thing. I'm Jewish. I know what you said is true. What's all this about? I simply stated historical fact.
Any regrets with your comments, given the offence it caused to many?
What I regret is when John Mann, the Labour MP, was screaming in my face I was a Nazi apologist, what I regret is that Jeremy should have suspended him, not have me suspended.
Ken, final thought. Amazing career that you've had, an amazing character. It's great to have you in the studios here at GBNews. What's next for you? Because you've got plenty of energy and the intellect is razor sharp.
Well, I'm a 76-year-old. And
you could be US president.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, basically, ever since I was accused of being anti-Semitic, I was cut out of everything political. So now I'm just the old house husband.
Is that right? Are you any good at that?
I'm very good. I do all the shopping, prepare the food, look after the kids.
You good at hoovering? Yeah, I like it. You've got red washing up gloves because you're red.
Yellow.
Aren't you? Yellow. Okay, Lib Dem all of a sudden in your old age. Ken, what a treat to have you in the studio. Thanks for making the time.
For having me.
Do come back and see us again soon. Ken Livingstone, folks.